This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Perhaps, just maybe, you too have noticed this trend. This is Wretched Radio. Perhaps you have heard a news report, a debate on the cable channel, making claims and accusations that so many things are so terrible because of blank. Speaking in generic terms, we see the world struggling because that happened once in 1974. We see this attitude producing all kinds of devastation. Have you heard claims like that? I've heard a lot of them. And my question is, says who? Well, can you verify some of these claims? We see that, by the way, happening courtesy of Pepe LePew would be a great example of this, who got canceled because he is responsible for the rape culture that we see today. My question is, says who? What scientific work, because remember, science is the god of the secular humanist. What science says that Pepe LePew, by being a lout as a skunk with a kitty cat, trying to kiss her repeatedly, which was wrong behavior of a cartoon, and we used to get that. Nobody thought he's raping her. Nevertheless, these days, I believe it was a New York Times columnist stating Pepe LePew was a good example of teaching boys how to not take no for an answer. Therefore, he's responsible for our current rape culture. Prove it. Show me the facts. And this is something that is going on persistently these days, and it is actually winning the day in the court of common consideration of morality, values, the direction of our nation, all kinds of claims that are anything but scientific. Case in point, this from WND.com, why Dr. Seuss had to go. He canceled himself 6 stories. This individual writes, offense is not only considered a harm, it is considered the chief harm in our society. Physical injury, after all, is merely physical, but mental or emotional injury that threatens our very sense of identity, that's the worst. And that is why you hear on university campuses that somebody will say something and they will feel like they have been violated. You hear that language. Or I was abused because somebody said something that caused them to have an emotion that they didn't like. They're likening emotional harm to physical harm, to saying something that was sexist, making it akin to rape. Why? Because in our current culture, feelings reign supreme, and if you do anything to hurt somebody's feelings, then you have to be canceled. And so it is with Dr. Seuss from the WND article. Because we find our identity in our own sense of self-creation, any societal denial of that sense threatens our identity. Carl Trueman writes in The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, the era of psychological man therefore requires changes in the culture and its institutions, practice, and beliefs that affect everyone. They all need to adapt to reflect a therapeutic mentality that focuses on the psychological well-being of the individual. So here's a question for you. How did Dr. Seuss do that? If that is why he has canceled himself, how do we know, and how do even the people who run the Dr. Seuss organization know that that has been the effect of 6 of his books? Did they do a poll? Is there some sort of correlation, any connection whatsoever between 6 rather unpopular, not often read Dr. Seuss books that it's actually causing the damage that they claim it is? You see, there's no proof. Accusations are made. They're powerful arguments because we do live in a therapeutic culture. If you make anybody feel bad in any way, shape, or form, that one anecdote, their story, unquestioned, represents everybody else, therefore canceled. Whoa, that's a scary place. From WND, when individual self-creation becomes the chief goal of a society, institutions must be torn down because, after all, those institutions foster a set of rules that may not be conducive to individual self-creation. Informational flow must be damned. After all, information may allow others to take a different, objectively based opinion about you than you take subjectively about yourself. Books must be burned, after all. Books carry with them implicit messages that may threaten your sense of self. Carl Trueman has this nailed. We live in a society where I identify what is best for me, who I am, what is good and what is bad, and anything that you do, because that is the supreme value in our society. If you do anything that hits that, dings that, challenges that, or nicks that, you're out. One person is enough, isn't it? Haven't we seen that? We've seen entire political careers brought down. Hey, this person once said something, and wow, it was terrible. Down they go, because if you hurt anybody or make anybody feel bad, you're canceled, you're out, your freedom of speech, it's like you're yelling fire in a movie theater. Based on what? How do we know Pepe LePew has created the rape culture? How do we know Dr. Seuss is making anybody feel bad? How do we know that mom and dad being used as title for biological parents or even adoptive parents is so horrible that Grace Church School, which costs $57,000 a year, zoinks, from kindergarten to 12th grade, located in Manhattan, is now canceling the terms mom and dad because their claim is that makes somebody feel bad. How many people did they ask? Anybody really? And how do we deal with a situation where, let's say, you've got somebody who lost a dad. Their dad died, tragedy. And now they celebrate Father's Day in school. Okay, do you change the celebration to accommodate the situation of one? Or do we help the one cope with it and deal with it? To pretend that there isn't a pain there isn't helpful. But we live in a world where if it is even potential, where it's possible that maybe, perhaps, just one person could be offended, then that's enough to bring it down. And that's what they do. Grace Church School. The goal of this guide is to provide the community with more inclusive language that is aligned with the mission of Grace Church School. And so they want to cancel mom and dad, and instead they use terms like adult relations or some nonsensical thing, because otherwise it would make them feel bad. Hey, the word adult makes me feel bad. There's no end to this nonsense. But the point is, and the helpful note in this is that the next time you hear this or somebody tries to sell you a worldview, ask them the source for their consideration. Where do you get this information that it is devastating to a young person if we use the terms mom and dad or watch a Pepe LePew cartoon? It's important to refrain from making assumptions about who kids live with, who cares for them, whether they sleep in the same place every night, whether they see their parents, etc. So we need to stop using terms like mom and dad. Furthermore, don't use the word happy holidays, because not everybody celebrates the holiday, even though they go home for the holidays. At Grace School, we work to be mindful of the language we use in order to avoid making assumptions. That could just devastate somebody. So we can't use, at this point, you can't use any words. Definite articles, they're too concrete. They're too definitive. Therefore, everything now needs to be an indefinite article. Is now approved. The has been canceled. This never ends. And believe me, it isn't going to. Instead of saying, where did you go for break? Say, name something you learned during break. Oh, okay. Because maybe somebody didn't go anywhere like you did, and you're going to make them feel bad. Can that happen? Of course it can happen. And of course we should be something that we used to think was common sense, which I know isn't commonly found these days, but we would be considerate of others. If I knew somebody never went on vacation, I wouldn't be asking them every morning at work, so where'd you go on vacation? Because I'm a human and they're a human, and Imago Dei means something and it has implications. And by the way, it does for everybody, whether they confess it or not. This is just unlivable. Tell me something that happened during break. Instead of saying everyone has insert item, say some people have blank, because not everybody has that. So you wouldn't ask, what kind of computer do you have? Because they might not have a computer. And that could be devastating. Why? Because we live in a therapeutic culture, self-defines what is valuable, and anything that harms or dings one person is worthy of canceling. It doesn't take 2, it doesn't take 10 or 10,000. It takes one anecdote, it takes one story. That's why you need to believe everybody's story, because everybody's story is valid. Therefore, you can cancel everything, including common sense, and calling people mom and dad, watching a Pepe LePew cartoon. And when this is put in front of you next time, just ask them the question, how do you know? How do you know? And maybe, just maybe, there's a better way of dealing with people that we could potentially offend, and get better at not offending people, certainly not intentionally, because otherwise, my friend, what you just said, it offends me, and now I have to cancel you. And this will become a circular firing squad, and none of us will survive it. This is Wretched Radio.
Well, thank you, Carol. I can't wait to try some of that low-sodium peppermint lasagna. Sounds delicious. Let's get to the weather, shall we? As you can see, we are going to have a massive warm front moving its way up the eastern seaboard, expecting temperatures upper 90s and low 100s. Unless, of course, you're outside of Christ. Then on Judgment Day, it is going to be hot. Back to you, Carol. Not only hot, weeping, gnashing of teeth. And so thirsty, your tongue's gonna be stuck to the roof of your mouth. You're just gonna wish for a storm to come through, which you folks down in the South can be expecting on Wednesday.